Hey, I'm Rob Teigen.
And I'm Joanna Teigen. Rob and I have been married over 30 years and share an addiction to coffee, bookstores, and Christmas music.
We often debate how many dogs are enough and who should win the voice every season.
We're a neat freak married to a not-so-neat freak, an explorer to a homebody, and an introvert to a people person.
But we do agree that our vows are for always, children are a gift, and prayer is powerful.
Our hope through this podcast is that we can walk with you in caring for the soul of your family. Thanks for being here. Thank you, friends, for joining us for the Growing Home Together podcast. Rob and I are in that sweet spot of parenting with our two oldest kids. They're both married to loving spouses, and they've established their own homes, and they're independent, and they're happy, and now they're giving us the amazing gift of grandchildren, so it is awesome. And on the other end of our family spectrum, our youngest son is just about to move out of grade school. So we're still in the thick of, early bedtimes and homework and basketball practice and everything that goes with that. But today we're going to talk about a stage of parenting that we might not hear as much about. And it's what we might call the messy middle of parenting, where kids are teenagers or college students and they're quickly growing up and preparing to leave the nest for good. Now, Rob and I have two college-age daughters in this stage, and I have to say that the questions and the emotions of raising young adults can get pretty intense.
Yeah, for sure. That's why we're so glad to have Brenda Yoder with us today on the program to talk about how to prepare our hearts and our homes for our kids to leave the nest. And Brenda is the author of Fledge, Launching Your Kids Without Losing Your Mind. And if you're like me, you might say, it might be too late. But I think Brenda's going to help us show that it's not. And she's a mom, a licensed counselor, a teacher, and popular speaker who gives biblical wisdom for parents who want to launch their children well. So thank you, Brenda, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we are so glad that you're here. And, I have to say, this messy middle is starting to feel a lot more messy for me right now with our middle daughter. She's almost at the finish line of college graduation, and I'm guessing that she's going to have a ring on her finger anytime now. So before the year is out, we're going to have to say goodbye as she leaves the nest of our home. And, I am so happy and proud of her, but my heart is hurting too. Can you tell us a little bit about what you call mom grief in your book and what that can be like for parents?
Yeah, mom grief and dad grief too, but I think more so for moms really is that sadness and loss that we have to identify is very specific to the change of season as your kids leave. And there's a lot of different types of grief that is kind of wrapped up into that. And my very first chapter in Fledge really is about grief. It's called You've Got Mom Grief. And, I think that as women or as parents, when your child leaves, we're maybe caught off guard because of the variety of emotions we feel. And I think for myself, I was kind of like you, Joanna, in that when it caught me off guard, it was when my third one was ready to leave the nest, my third out of four. And it seems like I cried his whole senior year. Mm-hmm. And I had to ask myself, why am I crying so much? Why am I so weepy and stuck and sad that I can't even enjoy the present? And because I had already launched two kids already to college, and we had a younger one still at home in junior high. And that's when I realized that what I was experiencing really was grief. And grief is a very specific type of sadness that really is around the losses and change. And so I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that when our kids leave the home, not just all of them, but with each one, there's an element of loss and sadness that we experience. And it can be for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that it did catch me off guard because she's our third of five. And I'm like, well, this should be getting easier because I've gone through this before. But like you say, each transition, it's unique. So that's helpful that you can put a name to it.
I wrote Fledge really for parents in your stage of life who are in the middle of, you're not empty nest yet, you have some who have left the nest, but you're still raising kids. Mm-hmm. And Pledge is really for anyone in that stage, because we talk about, raising your kids and releasing them. That's one act. We talk about the empty nest. Well, that's a whole different season of life. That is not what you guys are in. So in the season of life where everything is changing, you guys just acknowledge that you have kids who are married and going to become grandparents, and you've got some who are graduating, but you're still raising that one who's still in elementary school. And so you are in this constant state of flux, of this emotional roller coaster, because you kind of know what to expect in some of these new stages, but you're still experiencing these things that have been so normal for 20 some years. And so I think just acknowledging that when there's not a definite end marker, like the empty nest tends to be, that there is a lot of grief and emotions and a sense of vulnerability. And I think that's also what I want to just acknowledge, is that a lot of the emotions that kind of come with grief or with the changing stage that you're in, that just continues to change really until that last one leaves your home, is just a lot of vulnerability. And with vulnerability comes a sense of loss and a lot of emotions.
Yeah, it's really helpful that you kind of framed it that way, because I think we always joke that we're never going to be empty nesters, because we've got, our youngest is just turned 12 and our oldest is 28. And so we just kind of joke about that. But you're right, it does feel like we're in constantly these different stages and constant flux. And with that, we have another daughter who's starting college this year. And if you met her, she's an amazing, strong, smart young woman, yet as she becomes more independent, it can be tough when her ideas and options and opinions are really different from mine and how I raised her. And so how can a dad like me keep from getting into a battle of control with my child?
Part of it is really stepping back sometimes. And this takes some intentionality, stepping back and really reflecting upon what has God called you to. And I think as parents, when we keep this thing in front of us, in one of the first, chapter 2 or 3 of Pledge, I talk about kind of defining your strategy. And it's kind of this intentional foresight that we put in front of us, saying, my job is to equip them with what God has entrusted me to. But then that is what my job entails. And it really becomes more of a discussion with God about what God is changing in us and what God is calling us to, because we have to be obedient to God. And I think that's why the fledging stage is so hard, is you're still raising this younger one. And all of a sudden now this one is in that in-between stage. And I know for myself that when my oldest one went to college, and I thought she was supposed to go to a college closer to home, and she was really looking at one about 11 hours away, God really got my attention, and he said, Brenda, I'm working in her life. And if you don't get out of the way, you're going to mess things up. And it was this realization that, I'm not the boss of her, and God is working in her life. And if I don't get out of the way with what I think she should do, then I'm actually hindering the work that God is doing in her life. And that's our goal. Our goal is for our children to grow more dependent upon God. And it's a humbling. I think part of the thing of letting go of our young adults is that it's a humbling posture on our part. And it really entails us submitting ourselves to God in a new role and giving our children up to him, which kind of points the finger back to us to say, we tend to take responsibility or pride in our children. But I know God really showed me one time that just as I am not fully responsible for my kids when they maybe make choices or mistakes or sin, that is maybe hurtful or damaging, I'm also not fully responsible for the good things in their life too. Mm-hmm. Light bulb moment. Maybe God's working in their life, not me.
Right. Yeah, I like what you said about having a posture of humility, because it can be easy to kind of force our pace for our kids' growth on them. And, like Rob said, all of our daughters really are very capable and independent young women, but the road to getting there hasn't moved in a straight line for any of them. One of our daughters really struggled to learn how to manage her money, and another daughter was really scared to learn how to drive. So we drove her to school and work, way longer than we planned on. And our kids weren't always confident to handle just life skills like cooking or making their own appointments or whatever. And I know that some kids get really stuck. So they hold back from getting a job or moving their education forward or whatever. So what would you tell the parents whose child seems to be resisting growing up and moving on?
I think that a couple of things, and this may sound maybe harsh, but I think there's this element of reality sometimes that kids at different developmental stages just need to be told. And I do this in my job as an elementary school counselor when I really am working with kids in transitional stages who really want to stay babyfied. I just have to tell them, at your age, it is developmentally normal for you to do these things. And kind of it's that statement of what's typical for child development and what is really important for them, and also talk with them, validate their concerns or anxieties, but then also let them know that you believe in them. Like, hey, you've got this, and I'm not going to help you by doing it for you. It's really about helping them develop their confidence in themselves, but also confidence in what is typical and normal for their developmental stage. And I think that's what's really important, because if we kind of enable kids because they're uncertain about things when it really, the clock says, really, no, this is a life skill you really need to be developing, then we just exacerbate that anxiety that grows with them. And I know for Gen Z and for those who are coming out of the pandemic, there's an extra level of anxiety that is just part of their generation. And so I think we need to get back to just kind of basic life skills of hey, I know it feels scary, that affirmation and that empathy, but also letting them know it's better for you to learn this while you're here at home rather than feel like you don't have the skill when you get older. And the other thing is that somehow God has just designed us as human beings to figure certain things out. One of our kids married younger than actually, I guess both of them did, but one of our kids married a little bit younger than what maybe some others think should be a marrying age. And someone said, but what if they don't know, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what, they'll figure it out. We figured it out. Our grandparents figured it out. God has designed us to figure things out. And so it's really about encouraging and building confidence. And then the other thing I want to mention is strength-based conversations. I do this a lot with the students I work with. And I think it's just really, really important to have a growth mindset, but then to really help your kids develop their strengths and name their strengths. And then letting them know you've got this strength in this area and you can do hard things. So you've done this hard thing over here. So you're going to do this hard thing over there. And I know it doesn't feel comfortable, but it needs to be done. And I'm not going to help you because if I did, it's actually not my job. My job is not to make you feel comfortable. My job is to really help you to be independent and autonomous.
Ooh, that's a good word right there. Yeah, you're making me think about this time that one of our kids was kind of in a season of being stuck. And one of the areas was in her financial independence. And Rob went to her and said, we're going to have to require a certain amount of money from you every month to cover certain bills that you have to pay. And I think he expected her to be upset or feel criticized or something. And she came back to him a day or two later and thanked him for requiring that of her because she said that actually gave her dignity. And I thought that was such an interesting way to put it. Like sometimes when we do expect more of our kids and challenge our kids, that actually is energizing for them. Like, oh, you believe that I can do more than I thought I could. And so I love what you just said.
Yeah. And I just really I think sometimes we as parents, I'm saying this from a perspective of someone who works on the opposite side, which I see kids at school, right? So many times we will see kids who are doing great at school, but mom and dad are over there hovering over them and saying, oh, well, we don't think he can do this because of XYZ at home. And we're like, no, actually they're doing that at school. And I think sometimes we fail to see our children in the environments that God has really designed them for. And our kids need to know that we believe and have confidence in them. And one of my children said to me one time, they were about a junior in high school, and they said, "Mom, you don't trust me, and I haven't even done anything to lose your trust.
Mm-hmm.
You're stuck in your worry about what's going to happen. So why would you don't even, and it was this element of, oh, my kids do need me to believe in them. And there's a fine balance between a false belief of just giving our children empty affirmations of things that really aren't true. That's why I think strength-based talk is so important, and a growth mindset is so important, is because we really want our kids to really know what's true and what is tangible for them, which, tangible things are you have the capacity to do this. And if you fail, what's the worst thing that can do if you fail? You learn from it and you get up and you do it again. And I think that one other visual picture that always sticks out to me that I guess I realized at one time was when our kids kind of walk out our door, when they look back, seeing mom or dad standing on the porch, whether this is figuratively or literally, what's going to help or hurt them? Is it mom on the front porch waving her hand saying, "You got this," with a thumbs up? How's that going to speak to our child? Or is it mom or dad on the front porch wringing their hands, sobbing with worry because they don't have any faith in their child? And I think when God gave me that picture of what my child needs as they go off to college or go off to whatever endeavor, I really realized that they really need mom and dad in the rear window saying, "You've got this. I believe in you and you can do it."
Yeah, that's good. And it's very helpful. I do want to just camp a little bit on something you said, because it was kind of going to be my next question, and you touched on it just a little bit. But so I'd love to hear kind of more of your thoughts on that, because I was thinking in terms of what do we do? We're talking a lot about when our kids struggle to step forward or struggle to get that independence, but what do we do when they do step forward and they fall on their face? How can we come alongside them as young adults in that process without stepping in too much, but helping along the way? So I'd love to hear a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think it depends. Of course, it depends on the situation. But if we're just talking in general about, they try something and it doesn't work out, or exactly what you said was coming alongside them and even saying, how can I help you? Or do you want my help with this? Because sometimes they may say, "No, I really want to figure it out on my own." And if they do that, then we have to step back. If it's a matter of, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And then let them lead the questions, let them lead what they are needing from you. I think that's really important, is when your kids become young adults, it's about them leading. And it's about us stepping in as that door is open. And I think that, I think even our generation of parents and kids, we have forgotten that humanity has gone on years and years and years. And I think we live in this culture of fear of failure or fear of stumbling. And I use the term in both the books I've written called "Don't Steal the Struggle." And it's something that I've learned from the field of education, is that God really intends for our children's wing feathers to be developed. Resistance, failure, we learn from that and it strengthens us. So I think also giving your child, God's perspective of life, which is tomorrow's a new day and we'll try again tomorrow. We'll try over. What's a do-over? That's a common term. Again, I use daily in my job as a school counselor, is let's have a do-over. If we were to do that over again, what would we do differently? And I think that's a really good question to ask one of your kids. It's not telling them what to do, but it really is asking the questions to help them figure out, okay, if I would have done this differently, I would have listened to you. Or if I would have done this differently, I would have done X, Y, Z. So it's really about helping them reflect on whatever has seemed to be the failure. And again, looking at a growth mindset, and growth mindset really isn't about achieving an all or nothing goal. It really is about as long as we're moving forward and growing, then that's really what our goal is. Our goal is that the next time we come upon this situation, I'm going to have learned, I'm going to do something a little bit different. But the expectations are is that things aren't going to be always successful and perfect. I think those are some things to think about. The other thing, the flip side of that is that, mental health needs and crisis is something a lot different. So if your child is not doing well because they really have significant mental health needs that need to be addressed, then those are some of the other pieces where I know for myself, when I need to really say something to one of my adult or young adult children that may or may not be my place to say, but I would feel negligent if I didn't say it, then that's just how I preface it. I will say, hey, I'm just going to say this because I'm your mom and it's my job. You can take it or leave it. But I would feel negligent if I didn't say this. And then I just share my concern and let it go at that.
I love that. I love what you said about letting our kids take the lead. And you were making me think about when one of our kids was in high school, and kind of related to Rob mentioning failure. She was actually really seriously having some academic issues. And for a while she had been saying, gosh, Mom, I kind of wish I could homeschool. I wish I could homeschool. And I thought at first, oh, you just want to be comfortable. And it took me a long time to understand she was asking for help. And when it came down to it, and she really expressed what her needs were, and we did transition her to homeschooling, she became a straight A student almost immediately. But I think I had been really reluctant to let her lead that piece of her life. And then when she did, it was so fruitful for her. So everything that you're saying is feeling really personal today because we've walked that before.
Yeah. And I think what I've learned is it's kind of like a dance. I think when our kids are little, we lead, or I have pictures of my dad used to have me when I was little step on his feet. Well, and we would dance and he would step on my feet, right? And that's kind of how it is with our kids for a while. And then all of a sudden we're dancing with them. But as they become young adults, their last couple of years in high school, and as they become young adults and then go on into being adults with their own homes and lives and being much more autonomous, it's really about a dance where they take the lead, and it's going to look different. I think if we have the picture of it being a dance like that, then it helps us as parents to know we aren't completely disconnected. Our kids, for the most part, do want our input, but exactly what you said, Joanna, is sometimes when our kids ask for something or really say, this is what I'd like to do, we must listen to that because it usually is just for a season. And it also is an indicator that what currently is part of their life isn't working for them and it doesn't feel safe somehow. And their suggestion really is their way of saying, I don't feel like I don't have control over something that I'm really struggling with. And this is meeting a need of mine. And sometimes it's asking questions. So maybe it's thinking outside of the box. And I know I've coached and counseled a lot of parents who their child is really struggling in high school or something like that. And I'm a firm believer of thinking outside the box. If the child needs to do something like homeschool or go to a different school or do a hybrid for a year, just to help that child feel successful and that the learning environment is conducive to them, then do that. And I've often seen that sometimes that's all it takes is a little tweak like that. And then whatever their needs were at that time are met and they're able to grow and change. And they're kind of back on the course that you would maybe is the course that you thought you would see for them. But I'm a big proponent of thinking outside of the box when it comes to troubleshooting and problem solving for needs for a child.
Yeah, that's good. I'm thinking here as you're talking, because there's just so many things. I'm going to have to sit more with your book and just process, because a lot of things that you're saying are helpful in terms. I think a lot of times with our kids, the reason why we do kind of struggle to know how to launch them is because we're carrying a lot of our own fears and insecurities and bringing those into our kids and our relationship, because, we talk about failure. A lot of times why we protect our kids from failure is because we don't like failure and we don't like to see our kids fail. So we step in when maybe we need to let them figure things out. And sometimes we step back when we need to step in because of other insecurities and fears. So how do we not only self-talk ourselves as we're going in and out of these situations with our kids, but how do we support each other as a husband and wife in these? Because sometimes, I know Joanna sees me reacting to the kids out of my own fear or my own worries and concerns, and I see the same in her. So can you help us with that a little bit?
Yeah, I think part of it is not taking things personally and being, again, I think it's that posture of humility of saying, oh, maybe I do need to step aside a little bit, or, oh, maybe they're saying something here that I really need to kind of look at. I know for myself, my husband and I, we have one girl and three boys. And I have found that I tend to be more critical and harsh with my daughter, and he tends to be more critical and harsh with the boys sometimes, especially when they were teens or so. And I think there's an element there of recognizing that you're both a team, and as a team, you're parenting and releasing your kids, and as a team, you transition into parenting adult kids, and as a team, one day you're going to have an empty nest, and you're not against each other. And I think for my husband and I know at one point in time, we tended to kind of be at each other a little bit more when we would suggest something about the other person's maybe reaction or thought or criticism or parenting of the kids. And I think we kind of realized, hey, wait a minute, we both have the same goal. We both want the best for our kids. So we're a team. And we just started using that language. We're a team. And what that team scenario also means is that there's not just one play in the playbook. And it also means that we have to listen to the other coaches on the team, because the goal is for our kids to be healthy and autonomous adults who are responsible citizens in the world. I mean, that's the basic hope for all of us, I would think. And sometimes we have blind spots, and that's why God has given us a partner for those of us who are married, are to help us be humble enough to have someone who loves us and cares about us, to be able to say, hey, I think maybe you need to think about why you're wanting them to do X, Y, Z, or, hey, you were a little bit harsh there. Hey, you need to calm down and maybe go just take a time out because this isn't helping them.
Yeah, that's good. I was thinking about our daughter who got in a fender bender last year with Rob's car. And she called us crying from the curb downtown because she was so upset. And I think underneath that, she was so worried that we would be angry or disappointed in her. And, there have been plenty of times with our kids that we have been angry and disappointed in them, and we didn't always express it in the best way. And there have been times that we've hurt our kids' hearts by responding badly to what's going on in their lives. And I think as they do get closer to leaving the nest, all of those regrets and memories can kind of rise up and really become a heavy load on our shoulders. What would you tell the mom or dad who is feeling that kind of guilt and regret about their parenting failures today?
I think that that's an ongoing, again, discussion with God. One passage that has really encouraged me, because this is part of my hard story. I made a lot of mistakes with our earlier kids that they are still kind of carrying as burdens, even as adults. And so part of it is, I think, first of all, recognizing that if there's anything that you need to ask for forgiveness for or repent of, that you do that. I think that's the first step. Mm-hmm. The first step is saying, even to them, whether it's something you're currently dealing with, or whether it's something you realize now you wish you could have a do-over, but you can't. I think humility and honesty with our kids is always the way for better relationships. And so it's just saying, I'm sorry that I failed in these ways. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And if I could do things over, I would. But do you forgive me? And then I think that the second thing, again, is kind of repent and stop whatever it is that you maybe struggle with. Maybe it's something you're currently struggling with. For myself, I was a very reactionary parent, and I didn't realize at the time that I had my own attachment issues, and I realized that I was under so much stress at my job as being a teacher with high schoolers that I needed to get a handle on myself. And so I actually changed careers and went back to graduate school. so that I could have a less stressful job and options for part-time employment, which would be more conducive for my family. And so sometimes it's making a change. Sometimes it's going to therapy, dealing with your issues, because a lot of times our issues in parenting stem from our own hurts, from our upbringing, or from whatever insecurities we have or wounds that need to be healed. So maybe it's seeing a therapist and working on your own things, realizing that they impact kids. And I think the other thing is just acceptance. Again, a phrase that has helped me is I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And so once I realized that that's truly, I didn't know everything I know now. And I parented my younger kids much differently than I did my older ones. And then the third thing is just trusting God, accepting his forgiveness, but then also knowing that God is a redeemer of the years the locusts have eaten. And Joel 2:25 has been a verse of hope for me, that God will redeem the years that I wish I could do over. And then also in that verse is that God will remember my shame no more. So part of it is releasing the shame and guilt and blame that we may carry and leave that at the feet of Jesus.
That's so encouraging. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Joanna had mentioned our daughter getting in an accident with my car. And while I didn't love the damage on the vehicle and all of that, I was really glad that she called home. And, I always want my kids to feel like they can come to us and call home when things are difficult or when they have questions or things like that. So what advice would you give to keep the communication with our kids open and also be good listeners when they have needs?
Yeah, I think the first thing is don't freak out. Kids.
That's good. That's a good right there.
Kids will not tell you if they think you're going to freak out. And it's interesting because you may ask each individual child, because your freaking out may look differently from their freaking out. And their freaking out usually means that if mom and dad are going to be like, or they see fear on your face or anything like that, they will not, that's their indicator of mom and dad can't handle what I'm going to tell them. Kids tend to, even as babies, they gauge their emotions based on our emotions. So when we freak out, that tells them, okay, mom can't handle what I really need to know they can handle because I really want to know their thoughts. And so it's kind of putting our big girl, big boy panties on and putting this poker face on, which is we're not going to let them know that inside we really are freaking out. And then we listen and we be curious. I think curiosity is one of the biggest tools in communication as our kids get older, even when they're younger, to ask, tell me a little bit more about that. And again, it's a dance. Let it be their lead. Don't start being the investigator. Let there be open-ended questions. Listen. And sometimes, you might even need to say, thanks for sharing that with me. I need to think about this a little bit and maybe I'll get back with you. But I've heard multiple kids. I used to teach high schoolers. And even as I work with kids as a school counselor or as a therapist, but mainly as a school counselor, because we don't do therapy at school, but kids will tell us things. And I'll often ask them, well, have you told your mom or dad this? And they often will say no because they won't listen, or no because they'll freak out, or no because they're too busy. So I think part of it is being emotionally available for our kids. And then I think the other piece is if your child is really walking through something that really is hard for you to deal with, to seek your own safe space, whether through a counselor or a mentor or a friend where you can process it. And I've had to do that as a parent of adult kids, is when my kids do come to me to help them with hard things in their life, but I'm still their mom. And so, there have been times where I've set aside times to talk with someone that is confidential, that I can process my own fears and thoughts so that I don't impose those on my kids, so that I can be that stable sounding voice for them when they do come and ask or want to share things.
Yeah, that's helpful. So I had mentioned that our youngest is still in grade school and he's heading to middle school this fall. So Rob and I are in the stage of just actively discipling him to know Jesus. But that looks a lot different with our older kids who are in this stage of making their faith their own. I was hoping that you could just give us a little insight into what spiritual encouragement and discipleship might look like as our kids move into that a young adult stage.
Yeah, I think that principle of curiosity is really important, of asking them maybe, hey, like what are you learning in your spiritual life? During non-conflict times, asking how you can pray for them. One of our young adults really took a different theological standpoint within the Christian community than what they were raised with. And they actually really want to be able to have dialogue about that. And so I think keeping the door open to really talk with them about what they're learning without, again, being judgmental and asking those questions, tell me more about that, and have interest. I think our kids really do want connection with us as parents. And I think when it comes to faith, we really want to be the people who are still influencing them first and foremost. And so part of that includes keeping this open door of non-judgment. I mean, your kids know where you stand on things because they were raised in your home. So as they explore and as they struggle with their own faith and make it their own, and that includes maybe even rejecting the faith that they were raised in, I think here again, we have to put ourselves in humility under God's leadership, because the goal is not to raise kids who will choose Jesus by age 18. The goal is to point our children's hearts towards Jesus for a lifetime. And to me, that's really what Psalm 129 talks about. It's flying these arrows towards God. And we want to keep their hearts open and palatable towards God, even if they're in a season of, I've rejected Christianity, I've rejected this faith that you have raised me in. We want to still keep their hearts tender towards God. And that also includes modeling a relationship with them that models Christ himself, which Christ met people where they are individually, asked questions, and built a relationship with them based on love. And again, maybe a growth mindset is to be able to say our children are still trying to figure their life out. Most of us in midlife still have a lot of things to figure out about life and faith ourselves too. So let's give a little bit of that grace to our kids and not take it personally when they think differently than how we raise them. Because I think for myself, I often have to flip myself back in my child's shoes. When I was 28, did I want to be a replication of my parents? When I was 35, did I really want my mom telling me how to parent? And so sometimes when I flip the coin a little bit, I get a little bit more insight into maybe how my kids need me to be there for them, what type of questions to ask, what type of open door policy for them to come and talk to me. I'm not perfect at it. If any of my kids were to listen to this, they'd be like, Mom, you didn't do that very well last weekend. But I think that it's, again, we're growing too. So I think it really is about having the goal of a lifetime and to walk with our children through their highs and valleys, even in the spiritual life.
Yeah, that's good. That makes me think a little bit about just something that you said in your book, that when you talk about having an open door that our kids know they can walk through, is creating the kind of home while they're under our roof that they're going to want to come back to when they're grown. What are those elements that you think we build into our home that do draw our kids back when they're older?
Yeah, when I was writing that chapter, I asked on Facebook, like, what do you think of when you think of home? And it's this feeling of a place where someone can be themselves, and a place where you can come when everything else is harsh outside, there's this element of safety and security. At the bottom of one of the sections in that chapter of the page, I said a safe home means you are safe to approach when your kids need someone to talk to. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just this element also of growing with our kids. For you guys, as you have kids still in your home, and yet you've got older kids who come home, I think our family system needs to change as our children grow and change. I think it also means that when they come home for holidays and things like that, that it's more about, we don't have all these high expectations. And sometimes I have asked my kids when they're coming home for a holiday or for summer vacation, if they're in college or something like that, is to ask, what do you need for your time at home? Because I may have all types of activities planned. And one of my kids may say, Mom, I just want to be home. Like, I just want to sleep. I really just need some time by myself because I'm around people 24/7. And so that has been really helpful, I think, for our revolving door, is asking, what do you need? And really looking at the children individually. And then I think the other thing about them coming home is it needs to be somewhat about them and not all about us. And I'm preaching to myself here also, because sometimes I am so excited for all my kids to be home together that I get almost manic sometimes. And because our kids all live far away, and I had a child who lived as a missionary in another country for 4 years. And so when all my kids come home, even now, I've accepted that it may only be once, twice, maybe, at the most 3 times a year now. And I think we just need to realize that our experience of our kids coming home is different from our children's experience of coming home. And I don't want them to dread coming home because there's a highly charged atmosphere or it's not comfortable coming home.
Yeah, that's good. I can really relate to all those things you were saying, because we just went through the holidays a little bit ago here, and yeah, that's the other thing when you have kids that are still at home and kids that are launching and kids that are married and all that. I mean, every year looks different, and when they were younger, we held to those family traditions and things so much, and then you come, one year you have everybody in the house and it's a crazy chaos. And then next Christmas you have, one family and you're like, now what do we do? Joanne always prepares too much food, and because she's expecting 20 and we have 3 or something.
Right.
And it, you realize, wow, I don't like change either. I don't like these interruptions and these changes either. And so you do, as you've been saying, you kind of have to have a heart check each time and not make it about you. And I appreciate what you've said too. I think you've mentioned several times remaining humble. And I think that's really important as we kind of try to balance this. When I read books or watch movies, or so much of the theme of those is a kid, one way or the other, whether good or bad, that is trying to find some acceptance or meaning in their relationship with their dad or with their mom, with their family or whatever. And it's interesting. I think it's good to remind parents of that, like you said, that we do have a lot of influence on our kids, even if it seems like they're going their own way and doing their own thing and could care less where we're at. We do have a lot of influence, but we have to hold that with a lot of humility too, and have kind of them in the forefront of what's best for them that whole time. So I really appreciate what you've said. And I think as a dad, I can feel a little confused sometimes with the roller coaster of raising these young adults. One day they want to talk to me, the next day they're ignoring me. One day they want to go out for coffee. Then I see their face, but I don't hear a word from them for several days. And so it can get very confusing. And so I'm wondering, how can I keep myself steady when relating to my kids seems so challenging or changing all the time?
I think just telling yourself that it's normal and that don't take it personally. One thing this was a light bulb moment for me. I realized when one of my kids was in college and I was texting them and I didn't hear anything from them. And even my kids who are adults too, is I again try to put myself in their shoes. Okay, so they're probably in their dorm room or someplace with their friends, and their mom is texting them. They're not thinking about me. They're not off someplace dreaming about their mom like we as parents are dreaming about our kids when they're not around, right? Like,
yeah.
I wasn't dreaming about my mom when I was in college. My mom used to call maybe once or twice a semester because we had calling cards back then and it cost money to call. And I literally didn't hear from them for months and I didn't think about it. And it didn't mean that I didn't love them or I didn't want them in my life. And so I've learned for myself, at least, to tell myself this is normal. And our kids really do not have the affection towards us in the way that we have affection towards them. It doesn't mean that they don't love us, but our relationship is different with them than what it is with their relationship with us. And they truly are trying to be separate from us. So I think we just need to tell ourselves to not take it personally. And in an age where we have constant communication with our kids all the time, we need to give our kids the space to be themselves, to have a life separate from us, and to just kind of coach ourselves to say, this feels really hard. And I think that's the other thing, Rob, is to really just acknowledge in our own space of what we're going through as a parent whose nest is emptying in the fledgling stage where you guys are. And I think, Rob, that's why it's so hard. And that's one reason why I wrote Fledge for parents in the season that you guys are in, is that when all your kids are out of the house, there's a little bit more of a door that's closed, and it's a little bit more definitive to say, this is what this stage of life looks like. And we just got to that space. Our youngest just married this summer, and that gave me kind of more delineation to say, okay, I know what to do with this now. But when you still are parenting those little ones, and you've got these older ones that are ignoring you and these other ones who go for days and don't give you the time of day, it really does feel very personal. But I think we just have to tell ourselves it's okay. And even if my children don't really want me actively in their life right now, I need to be okay with that. I need to respect their boundary. It doesn't mean they don't want a relationship with me, because I'll tell you, one thing I've learned from kids is that no matter how awful of a parent one may be, no matter what the choices are, a child in the center of their heart still always wants their parents' acceptance and love. Mm-hmm. So just pull yourself through and know that it's normal and that it won't be this way forever.
Yeah, you're right, because it's that flipping the coin, like you said. Because just as you said that, I was thinking when I was in college, I love my parents, but I didn't. I went to Chicago or to school in Chicago, and my parents lived in Minnesota. I didn't give them much thought. I was busy going to classes and, with friends and things like that. But you're absolutely right. Flipping the coin there and remembering where we were at and what we were trying to accomplish and go through, and even our own thoughts and processes and faith journeys and things. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. You're making me think a little bit of something that Rob said, because our kids do like to come home and bring a lot of laundry with them and go straight to the refrigerator. And it's that idea of feeling like, oh, my child is taking me for granted, right? But I think when we do feel that space where they're not in our lives every minute, they're not actively seeking out quality time with us anymore because they're young adults and they're busy, maybe being taken for granted is kind of a sign that they know we're there. And maybe that's a good thing. And I take a little bit of comfort in that,
Yeah, I think there's that sunny side and shadow side of that I guess we have to look at for the situation. If we truly do think that they are really not, really very grandiose and not really thinking about us or about their impacts, or we're just really enabling poor behavior, then that's something we can, I guess we have to try to sift through. But for the most part, what I've learned for the most part, even those kids coming home and not thinking about, they really don't think about us as adults, I think, until they get a lot older. And honestly, I was probably in my early 40s when I went on a trip with my parents to Italy, because my dad is from Italy. We went on kind of this lifelong trip with them. And there was a moment where I was standing there in the hotel and I realized, my mom's a person outside of being my mom. And I was 40 when I had that realization.
Right.
And so our kids don't see us. Our kids see us as mom and dad. And I think you're exactly right. I buy too much food too when the kids come home, kind of exhausting. I never know what they're going to eat. And then you make a bunch of stuff and they make plans to go out with friends.
Right.
And so then they're only home for one meal when you thought they were going to be there for 4 or 5. But I have to just tell myself, that's part of that thing of coming home. I want them to feel welcome coming home. I don't have to shop like that, like I used to every week. And so it's not a big deal. So I think, again, it's such a learning curve for us. I think just as our kids are learning their new role in life, we're learning that new role too.
For sure, for sure. And I think your book Fledge is a great tool for parents that do feel like it's overwhelming. It's a good encouragement, and it gives great practical tips and tools. And something else we have as parents that probably is our strongest thing is the power of prayer, because that can go with them even when we can't, and can give us the wisdom we need to step in when we need to, and to stay back when we need to. So, with that in mind, I'm wondering if you would mind praying for the parents that are listening today and maybe struggling with this young adult and this launching period, or maybe just do feel like they really need extra wisdom. Would you mind praying for our listeners?
Sure. Lord, we just thank you for the children that you've given us, and for each of the parents who are listening to this podcast. And Father, I ask that you would just show each parent who's listening your presence in their life, and that you see them as a mom or dad who's really struggling with so many different changes and feelings and their own insecurities and vulnerabilities in this stage of life. Help them to know, Father, where they may need to step aside or step back, where they might need to step in, but also where they may need to take a new posture of letting go with humility, and learning that you desire us to seek you in this new stage of parenting. Rather than turning our hearts and our minds and our eyes towards our children, you want us to turn our hearts and our minds and our eyes towards you. So, Father, help us to embark in a new parenting style of seeking discernment from you, having a less hands-on approach and having more of a heart-on approach, with you being our lead and our guide. We thank you for each child who's represented in the families listening to this podcast. And we thank you that you have a hope and a future for them. Help us, Father, to see you and our child in the big picture, not just today. And we ask that you would meet us with your wisdom right when we need it. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Where can our listeners, those who are listening today, where can they go to find more out about your resources, about Fledge, your book, and things like that?
Sure, they can go to brendayoder.com. They can also go to any online bookstore for Fledge, or ask for it in your local Christian bookstore. They can also find me on Instagram at Brenda Yoder Speaks, and also listen to, if you're a mom, we have a Midlife Moms podcast that I co-host with Amelia Rhodes. And we also have a Midlife Moms Facebook community that you can find on Facebook. And that's where I am when I'm not here in Tijuana, Indiana.
Oh,
Right.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Brenda. You've given us just a huge amount of fresh perspective and encouragement today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And friends, we're so glad that you joined us today too. And Rob and I would love to connect with you online over at growinghometogether.com. You'll find some resources to help you out in praying together as a couple, and praying for your kids, and creating moments of quality time together. We'd love to see you there.
And at Growing Home Together, we're caring for the soul of your family.
And we're growing home together with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.